Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my power rankings for the 2025 Spanish Grand Prix. I'm sure race with no controversy whatsoever. This will be very, very simple. Now, we're going to be starting at number 20. And of course, it is the Red Bull driver, but it is the Red Bull driver of Yuki Tsunoda. So for Tsunoda, qualifies 20th, opts to start from the pit lane, out-qualified by his teammate Max Verstappen by 5.8 tenths of a second, and that is with Verstappen only doing one run in Q1. So likely that gap could have easily been, a second or so, even more, if Verstappen had opted to do a second run at the end of Q1. In the race, again, pace was not particularly good, was basically lapping about 2 seconds a lap slower than Verstappen, and comes home to finish 13th. In the race, was 14th on the road, but promoted because of Behrman's penalty. So pretty poor weekend all around for Tsunoda, so I think putting him 20th is a pretty reasonable spot. For number 19, I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon, a very anonymous Grand Prix for the Haas driver. Qualifies 16th, out-qualified by his teammate Behrman by 1.3 tenths of a second, and then finishes 16th on the road. Very quiet Grand Prix, didn't look particularly fast, particularly comfortable. So again, that's why I've decided to rank him 19th on my power rankings. Number 18 is Colapinto. Another tough weekend for the Argentinian. The reason I think putting Colapinto above Ocon, despite the fact that I think Colapinto had a much weaker race, like the race pace gaps between Colapinto and Gasly were pretty bad. Not quite as bad as Tsunoda Verstappen, but it was a pretty big struggle. It is the obvious fact that Colapinto had pretty bad luck in qualifying, mechanical issue, and that, just as things were looking like they were going to start to click, or for one lap pace at least, car gives up on him and he's not able to set a time. So ends up being out qualified by Gasly by 2.5 tenths of a second, which honestly, given the circumstances, isn't too bad. But so again, that's why I'm kind of being a little bit more lenient with Colapinto's qualifying, but still, the race was not particularly good. Number 17 is Lance Stroll. So, of course, for Stroll, withdrew from the Grand Prix, so he's basically being judged on qualifying alone. Qualified 14th and was out-qualified by his teammate Alonso by half a second. So, can't really say a whole lot, but more than that, of course, he's going to be undergoing surgery, might have already had the surgery already as of the recording of this video. And again, pretty unclear at this point whether or not he's going to be back for Canada or whether or not he's going to be back after that. So again, hopefully his wrists are okay and hopefully he's back to full health in short order. Number 16 is Carlos Sainz. So for Sainz, qualified 17th, out-qualified by his teammate by 1.6 tenths of a second. And then in the Grand Prix, finishes 14th on the road. All in all, a pretty quiet Grand Prix for Sainz. This was a track where I think for Williams, at least, this was one of their worst tracks so far this season. So again, it was kind of hard for Sainz to show much more than that. But still, overall, not a fantastic Grand Prix for him. Number 15 is his teammate. I thought, for Albon, he honestly did a really good job in qualifying 11th, given the struggles that they were having with this track. I thought that was a really good job. I already mentioned the qualifying gap, and then, of course, retired from the race with 2 broken front wings. Now, I think, a little bit of that was probably a bit of bad luck, but some of that is going to be car positioning as well, and knowing, when you should back out of the corner, and, where not to put your car. That leaves your front wing in a bit of a vulnerable position, especially since it happened twice. So overall, not a great Grand Prix for the 2 Williams drivers, but again, I think we have a couple tracks coming up like Canada, Austria, which should suit their car much, much better. Number 14 is Kimi Antonelli. So for Antonelli, qualifies 6th, out-qualified by his teammate Verstappen by about 2.6 tenths of a second. And in the race, unfortunately, he was running in 7th, a bit off his teammate's pace. But then, unfortunately, a second mechanical retirement in 3 races for the Italian driver means that he ends up with no points. And that retirement had a pretty big impact on the race. And without that, you probably have a very, very different outcome and also a very, very different narrative that's coming out for this kind of 2-week break until the Canadian Grand Prix. Number 13, I'm going to go with the man he replaced at Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton. So for Hamilton, this was probably one of his worst weekends of the season, at least I would say in terms of race pace. Qualifies fifth, outqualifies his teammate Leclerc by 800ths of a second. And while on paper that looks pretty good, outqualifying Leclerc, Leclerc made what in hindsight was a very smart move, very fortuitous move, in basically only using one set of tires in qualifying. Only doing one run, and again, that kind of definitely helps Hamilton qualify ahead of him. So it's kind of harder to look at that qualifying result and say, oh yeah, Hamilton had a great session, where Leclerc basically deliberately only did one run, which obviously hurt his starting position. In the Grand Prix, he required team orders. The teams had to swap around, put Leclerc ahead of him, and basically, if you look at like the gap before the safety car, where Leclerc had like a 10-15 second gap on Hamilton, it shows how much of a race pace gap there was, which is something that even the last couple of years where Hamilton's maybe been outqualified by Russell, the race pace has either been equal or if not better. So the fact that he's having races like this where the race pace is kind of nowhere is quite concerning for Hamilton. Number 12 is Liam Lawson. So for Lawson, qualifies 14th, or qualifies 13th, I should say, out-qualified by his rookie teammate Hadjar again. I know, Liam Lawson is still technically a rookie himself, but again, he does have 11 more Grand Prix starts than his French teammate. But qualifying has definitely been a big issue, and that's really why I can't put him any higher. Finishes 11th in the race. I thought, honestly, the race pace was really good. And he was, not too far off Hadjar's pace, but ultimately in the end, I think hurt a little bit by the timing of the safety car and just the fact that the safety car came out at all. But I think, qualifying struggles for me definitely holds him back a little bit. Number 11, I'm going to go with Gabriel Bortoleto. So for Bortoleto, qualifies 12th, one of his best qualifying performances of the year, outqualifies his teammate Hulkenberg by 1.5 tenths of a second. Unfortunately, didn't have a great start. Teammates gets ahead of him, and then I think just kind of lost a little bit of time, a little bit everywhere in the races, and ultimately ends up 12th on the road. Given where even without all the stuff that happened after the safety car, Hulkenberg still would have ended up P9. So you're saying that again, there's a little bit of a gap there, I think, in race pace. But again, young driver still learning. The good news though is that the ultimate one lap pace looks really good for Bortoleto, and I think second half of the season I could definitely see him if he's able to continue qualifying Hulkenberg by that margin. I can definitely see him finishing ahead of Hulkenberg in the races more often than not come the second half of the season. Number 10 is Oliver Behrman, qualifies 14th, decent job in qualifying, and then I thought did a really good job in the races. Had a bit of I would say, a little bit unfortunate 10-second penalty, which I thought wasn't really warranted, especially some of the things that happened afterwards, like the first Verstappen-Russell incident where Red Bull basically thought it was too marginal and asked him to swap positions. And then you look at the other incidents with Lawson and Behrman, and you compare the two of them and you say, those are very, very similar. Why was one deemed to not be a penalty and the other one was? So I think, a bit unfortunate for Behrman. And then that 10-second penalty basically really dropped him at the end. Otherwise, he definitely looked like the faster of the two Haas drivers this weekend. Now, for the guy who obviously the center of attention this past weekend was, of course, Max Verstappen. And while, I think it's very easy to say that this ranking is a little bit high, I'm going to go over some of my rankings from some of his worst Grand Prix last year. And I think I've seen some other listings like Ed Straw's one for the race, for example, just as a comparison, where he ranks Verstappen, very, very low, I think in the bottom 3 or 4 drivers. And obviously I've not put Verstappen in the bottom 3 drivers. In fact, I've put him in the top 10. But I think, interestingly enough, if I look at some of his races last year, I do think that my judgment, or at least my ranking system, is at least somewhat consistent. So I'm a little bit more confident with that. So Austria last year, I ranked him 7th. That was the one where he had pretty marginal contact with Norris. Azerbaijan, just plain slow. I ranked him 14th. Abu Dhabi, he had the lap 1 collision with Piastri, which I thought was just a really dumb, egregious mistake on his part. I ranked him 14th there. as well. The two road rage races, I guess you could basically borderline call them road rage races. Hungary, I ranked him 9th. In Mexico, I ranked him in 11th. And then again, when you look at that, compare that with where I ranked Verstappen here, it's honestly in the same ballpark. So I think it's just, for me, I don't penalize Verstappen's kind of red mist moments, if you will, as harshly as some other people do. And maybe whether that's I shouldn't do that, whether I should mark it more harshly, that's I think a personal, subjective opinion. I definitely mark mistakes, outright mistakes like Abu Dhabi, and I also penalized just being outright slow. Like he was slower than Perez all weekend in Baku last year. I penalize that much more heavily than this. And I think because this is something that basically only affects Verstappen, at least in the last 2 or 3 years, I can't really think of another incident. It makes it so that it's a very Verstappen-centric issue. So, all of that aside, so for Verstappen, qualifying I thought went very, very well. Went about as well as it could have. Qualified third, out-qualified Tsunoda by 6 tenths. Basically best of the rest behind the two McLarens, I should say. Excellent start, gets ahead of Norris, and I thought for 95% of that race, his race pace was, excellent, and he was basically keeping the faster McLarens on his toes. Was lapping 2 seconds a lap faster than Tsunoda, and then safety car comes out, and it basically all completely unravels. Even when the safety car comes in, he has that great save. And then again, he gets passed by Leclerc, which I think was, inevitable, given the tires he was on. And then you have the 2 incidents with Russell. So basically, I think one way that I could possibly rationalize this is if you think of it like a test where you have, different questions and you get, points for each one. For basically 80 to 90% of this test called the Spanish Grand Prix, Verstappen basically got a perfect score. The other, 10, 20%, he gets a 0 or a negative score. And so on the balance of that, without that incident with Russell, he almost certainly would have been ranked second, possibly even first. And again, that incident with Russell drags him down quite a bit. So again, we'll see what happens. He's very, very close to a race ban. And if that happens, I expect Red Bull to get no points that weekend, just as a prediction. And again, a bit like Magnussen last year, I honestly expect, I think I understand why people are calling for a race ban, but I think similar to Magnussen last year, what will likely end up happening is he does get one, is that it's going to be for an incident that definitely did not warrant it. A bit like with what happened with Magnussen last year, where, he had a bunch of incidents early in the season, which were, borderline very dangerous. And then he gets one for something that was, pretty undangerous, right? And that incident was enough to basically set him over the limit for the race ban. So again, he does have to be very careful, but I think given what happened this past weekend, just with the fact that the front wing rules didn't really change the pecking order a whole lot. I think realistically speaking, Red Bull aren't really in this title fight, and for most of the drivers, if they're not fighting for the championship, they don't really care too much about where they are in the championship order. So that's all I'm going to say on Red Bull Verstappen for this Grand Prix. Number 8, moving on, is Fernando Alonso. I thought really solid Grand Prix, qualifies in 10th, out-qualified Stroll by half a second, like I said. In the race, finishes 9th, a little bit fortuitous with safety car, Verstappen's penalty. He had a bit of a trip through the gravel as well, so that kind of prevented him from being higher on this list. But all in all, I think a really solid Grand Prix weekend, and he's had, I think, an upturn of form, since the last 3 races, since, Aston Martin started to bring some upgrades to the car. Number 7 is Pierre Gasly, qualified 8th. Thought did a really decent job in qualifying, out-qualified Colapinto, like I said before. And then in the race, I think just a solid result. Was kind of fighting for that best of the rest with Hadjar and Hulkenberg. Ends up finishing 8th. So I think overall a really solid Grand Prix. Number 6, I'm going to go with Isaac Hadjar, qualifies 9th, and then in the race, finishes in 7th. So again, finishes second of the best of the rest group. I thought overall very, very solid Grand Prix. Something that I've mentioned a couple times in my power rankings, so I'll mention again. I do wonder at points, what is the ultimate potential of that car? Is that is the car so strong that a driver who had, a good but not great F2 career can get consistent points, qualify, very, very high in it. Or is Hadjar a much better driver than, we thought, looking at his junior record? And I think that's something that is going to, I think, unless you replace Lawson with someone like Sonoda, or if you promote Hadjar to Red Bull, even then that might not fix things. Again, it's going to be a bit of a question mark, which will take some time to figure out an answer to. But all in all, really solid weekend again for Hadjar. Number 5, I'm going to go with Lando Norris. I think for Norris, I think his race was honestly pretty solid, except for the start. Race pace was pretty good, was closing the gap to Piastri. It was always going to be very hard for him to actually get in front of Piastri, given how difficult overtaking's been this year. But nonetheless, I thought race pace was good. Qualifying, again, a bit of a struggle. Qualify second, but still 2/10 gap to Piastri is a little bit too big. And again, the start, not fantastic. I think, you could probably justify Norris being, bottom half of the top 10, like around 7th, 8th, 9th, I would say. But I think race pace was decent enough that, I think 5 is suitable for him. Number 4, I'm going to go with George Russell. So for Russell, qualifies 4th, finishes 4th. Pretty eventful Grand Prix, last couple laps with the 2 incidents with Verstappen. Qualifying, I thought, went pretty well. Basically matched Verstappen's lap time in qualifying. And then in the start, a bit of an anonymous Grand Prix, not amazing pace, was slower than Leclerc, slower than Hamilton, I believe, as well. But still, actually, no, I think Hamilton... I would have to think about that. I think Hamilton was actually behind Russell, but still a pretty good, solid weekend for the Mercedes driver. Number 3, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg. For Hülkenberg, I thought really, really strong pace. And again, I've talked about this in past years where it's teams that, bring a mid-season upgrade that suddenly completely changes their fortune. If we have a couple more races like this where Hülkenberg's able to get really close to the points or get points, then performances like we saw this past weekend will not be ranked quite as highly. So I think we're going to have to see if this is one-off or if this is, genuine, improvement from Sauber, or if, Hülkenberg had, a fantastic drive, because he was basically, keeping pace, doing a really, really good job, keeping pace with the other midfield cars around, like the Racing Bulls, the Alpine, which I think, especially in the Racing Bulls case, is still the quicker car. Had an excellent start as well, gained 5 positions there. Qualifying, again, a little bit of a marks off from there, as he got qualified by his teammate, and that prevented him from being second. But still, I thought really good Grand Prix overall. All right, number 2 is Charles Leclerc, qualified 7th. Like I already said in the Hamilton section, again, it was a tactical reason why he qualified that low. In the race, I thought just did a really solid job, really excellent job, really good race pace, and got a really well-deserved podium at the end of the weekend. And number 1, I think not really much of a doubt, especially after Verstappen's shenanigans, is Oscar Piastri. Qualified on pole, qualified his teammate by 0.2 of a second. Really strong start to the race, and then just kind of kept the gap in a really solid, 5-6 second gap to Verstappen, and then Norris later on. And then after the safety car restart, just kind of pulled away off into the distance. Very, very clean, very clinical Grand Prix win by the Australian driver, and he's number 1 in my power rankings. So there you go. There's my power rankings for the 2025 Spanish Grand Prix. If you think Verstappen is too high, that's totally fair. I can understand why. You may feel that, Verstappen's actions warrant him being judged, placed 19th or 20th. Or even in 22nd, if that's somehow even possible. But again, I think looking at some of my past power rankings like Hungary, Mexico last year, I think I'm generally being pretty consistent with those types of behaviors, those types of results. So again, I'm not going to change it too much. So, or stray too much from that kind of way of doing it. So again, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.